because the congressman has been a great support. And we're hoping today to kind of give him some talking points. So when he's in Congress and he's talking to other members, that he knows really what he's supporting, and he has some of those stories to tell in his back pocket. The other thing that we wanted to really talk about was this bill that's currently in the House. It's just HR 1573. Yeah, it's a pretty simple bill. It's basically allowing the Peace Corps logo to be displayed on a gravestone, which I think hopefully everyone can agree is definitely a good thing. But Peace Corps here in Massachusetts has been a strong presence. Currently there's about 8,000 people living in Massachusetts who have served in the Peace Corps.
Oh, wow.
And there's 250 people currently serving in Massachusetts. I know for at least two of us, we work in the Congressman's district, and we also volunteer here. So we just kind of wanted to go around the horn, if that's okay with you, and just kind of tell our stories and talk about why it's so important that Peace Corps continues to be funded.
Absolutely.
And I think Jerry was going to kick us off.
Okay. I want to tell about the things I've done since I came back, which I probably would not have done had I not been in the Peace Corps. And I grew up right up the water here in Revere, not too far away, but not in this district. And one of the things is I'm a dentist, and when I got out of dental school, I got the job exactly what I wanted. I was in a neighborhood health center in Boston for 5 years, where there were a lot of Spanish speakers, and I was able to speak Spanish. I probably would not have spoken Spanish otherwise. I'm a terrible language student. And, and I had the orientation to go in a place like that, and that was it. I also went and I worked for 2 years in a migrant labor project in eastern Massachusetts. Most of us don't realize there were migrant laborers here. We had a whole bunch from Puerto Rico, south of Boston and northwest of Boston. And there were 4 teams, and we went out there. Each team went out 1 day a week and delivered very basic dental care to these people. And we were written up in the Globe once. But on my team, 3 of us were former Peace Corps volunteers. And we never would have done this otherwise.
Where did you serve, by the way?
I was in Peru, Puno, Peru.
That'd be great, yeah.
Right on the shore of Lake Titicaca, which is 2.5 miles up.
Okay.
And so I never would have done a thing like that had I not had that orientation. I did some stuff out of the country where I've been to Nicaragua and Colombia. I've been to Nicaragua 3 times, Colombia once, taking teeth in the middle of nowhere. In Colombia, we had to go on a mule ride that would have made John Wayne look like a sissy, I'm telling you. And one of the stories I tell about, and people who have never been to Latin America, done things like that, don't often go down there. It was with a youth group, a couple of youth groups that I went. And in Nicaragua, one town, there was a dentist there, and the mayor of the town told me, don't worry, you won't see the people he sees. So I was seeing about 55 people a day, taking about 160 teeth, using a bridge chair and stuff like that. And if I wasn't there, they had to spend about $2 each way to get to a dentist, or plus the cost of taking a tooth. And the girl 19 came to me with 2 very bad teeth. And I said to her, why don't you see the dentist there? And she said to me, he charges too much. When I asked her how much it was $2.80 a tooth. It doesn't seem like very much, but to her it was. And I said, what happens if you say to the dentist, I have 2 bad toothaches, but I don't have that much money? She said, he'll take them out for 28 cents each, but he won't give you a shot first. I don't like that idea, I can see. I only tell you that because it brings out the truth. What it's like for those people to live with.
My mouth's dropping on the Really?
Yeah, that's the story she told me.
That's probably the cost, right?
That's right.
Anesthesia probably is what the cost
anesthesia probably costs them $1 for the needle and $1 for
Yeah.
anesthesia there.
Wow.
So, but to take those out without a shot, that's what people live with.
Yeah.
If some of our former Peace Corps volunteers do not go down there and offer some service. And I think that's really worth doing. Right now, I work 2 days a week in an office in South Lawrence, and 90% of my patients are Dominican, 30% of the parents do not speak English, and were I not aware of the culture and the language, I'm the only dentist there that speaks Spanish. And for those people, they find it very, very comforting to not have to use a translator. So I think that some of the things we go here, if it's a feeling and the language, we can be helpful. And I'm not a superstar by any means. I'm a very average guy. But to be able to do that, I think I'm rendering a service to the people in this country and sometimes people outside the country. So,
before you, should probably, sorry, and say, so say who we are, where we served, where we live,
Great.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm Vanessa. I served in Honduras from 2008 to 2010. I actually work in downtown Boston for a technology company in sales and marketing.
Well, we'll introduce ourselves as we go around.
Sure. My name is Bill Lewis, and I served in Kenya. And what else to say? Most recently, I am in Cambridge. I was part of the Broad Institute doing computational genetics, if you're familiar with the Human Genome Project. So,
My name is Neil Peterson. I had worked in northern Thailand as an agricultural extension agent back in 77 to 79. And right now I'm working with a nonprofit that works in developing disabled adults, working in a residential setting, group home for them.
And since I'm going to go next anyway, I'll
Yeah.
introduce myself and I'll tell you my story.
Okay.
I'm Dave Honey on the card. I was in the Peace Corps in Sierra Leone in 68 to 71 as a science teacher in elementary science and also teaching physics at the University of Sierra Leone. And my wife and I were both volunteers and we went to Kenya. We were staff trainers in Kenya after that. And I've been on the board of the National Peace Corps Association for the last 7 years. I just left. So I've stayed involved. My relationship with Steve is that he and I were seatmates in the Massachusetts Senate for 6 years.
Okay.
So if he doesn't tell everything he knows about me, I won't tell you.
Okay.
But anyway, we were good friends and we worked well together. And we really appreciate his support. He's been terrific. So let me just say, I'm not surprised, but I'm impressed by his level of commitment. So it's been important. I think what you were saying earlier was important, that what we're trying to give you is a sense for Steve as to how he can use his position on the Finance Committee and also in Congress to sort of advocate for Peace Corps when budget issues are coming up, because we're really, really constrained. So I'm going to give you some points that I think will be helpful in that argument. First of all, one is the most important is cost effectiveness of Peace Corps. It's called Peace Corps for a reason. It's to maintain the peace. That's the purpose of it. And then you ask your question, dollar for dollar, how's it doing in that regard, relative to how we spend our other military dollars. Well, here's a good example. When I was back in Sierra Leone 2 years ago, 22 science math teachers came over from the United States after having recovered Sierra Leone recovered from the war, the Blood Diamonds War. And those 22 volunteers were teaching in the villages and making friends. One of those teachers taught the president of Sierra Leone 30 years prior.
Really?
And he remembers that as the most significant educational experience of his life. And he said because of that teacher, he went to college, and that he would never be president of Sierra Leone if he hadn't had that teaching in the Peace Corps. There are stories like that all over the world for great leaders as to how the Peace Corps has affected them. And so I think if you look at the numbers, those 22 volunteers, total cost is less than the cost of putting one set of boots on the ground in Afghanistan.
Wow.
Now you think about an ROI on security. What's the best way to spend your money? Well, we're not making good decisions in that regard when we look at our military budget. So the 10 million we're asking for in Peace Corps it's a silly request. We should be tripling our budget. But if we could at least get the 385 we're asking for, that would make a difference. But he needs good arguments for that, and I think I just gave you one of them. Secondly, I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens, and this is the second point, is Peace Corps volunteers. What do military people do when they come back? Well, a lot of them come back and do enormously powerful things, but a lot of them come back from military service so damaged that they really require a lifetime worth of service. So now I'm just looking from a policy standpoint. Peace Corps volunteers come back and they dramatically shift and change their communities. They make huge contributions to their communities. One example I think for me was when the Blood Diamonds War was going on in Sierra Leone. I was able to meet with John Kerry and Susan Rice, who's now National Security Advisor, with the ambassador from Sierra Leone, and John was alerted to the Blood Diamonds contribution that we were making as a country, and he went over and supported that legislation. We brought our kids from Sierra Leone who had been amputated into the hearing, and Joe Moakley came in and just hugged them all and said, "We're going to get this bill out today." Joe was in tears. And all that happened because one volunteer took the third goal of the Peace Corps seriously, which is you go and teach, you go and teach, you go and learn, and the third goal is come home and teach. So that third goal was what motivated me to do that. I stayed with it. I became an educator. I started the Worldwide Schools in Massachusetts, which gets volunteers to speak and to relate to teachers in our schools. If you're in Peru and you're teaching Peru here and the volunteers in Peru, we build this relationship between the teacher and the Peace Corps volunteer. It's been a wonderful program. I also started the Centers for Global and Multicultural Education in Massachusetts, which has now trained over 17,000 teachers in global and multicultural education. And we're still doing it today with almost no resources. And that model has been replicated in 5 other states. So you begin to think about, well, we're not talking about one volunteer for 2 years in Sierra Leone. We're talking about giving people an experience that transforms their lives and the lives of all the people that they touch. So that's an argument he needs to be able to make, is that the investment in Peace Corps isn't just sort of a soft, nice, gee, it's a nice kind of thing to do. No, it's a dramatically important effort in foreign policy. So it turns out almost 2/3 of our foreign policy, of our foreign service and our AID staff were former Peace Corps volunteers.
Really?
So the investment in Peace Corps is the best possible investment we can make as a country. Last year, I brought President Corona back to meet Kamala Patrick, and we ended up starting trade agreements with almost 20 different companies, American companies and African companies. Those trade agreements alone would pay for more than our Peace Corps contingency. So there are just so many powerful arguments, and I'd be happy to talk with Steve about this more at another time, but so many powerful arguments as to why our investment in Peace Corps is the best possible return on investment we can get. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fire away.
Okay, I guess, again, referring to the investment in Peace Corps and what you can get out of it, it's friends of mine who work in northeastern Thailand were working in agriculture, and one of their projects was building small fish farms. The villages that they were working in, after about 6 months of their work, USAID came in and stated that they were going to build a communal fish pond for the village itself. My friends explained to them that it probably wouldn't work, but they went ahead anyways, built the fish pond, stocked it, and within roughly, I would say, maybe a week and a half, all the fish had been taken out of the pond. And when the EID representatives couldn't understand what was going on, my friends explained to them that the Thai farmers basically had a fear of losing their share of the fish and their interest. So what they would do is they'd run down in the middle of the night and they would basically fish the pond. And so after everyone doing that and pulling out their portion of the fish in there, they basically depleted it to the point where the stock was empty, and they were harvested way before proper time anyways. They weren't the right length. And what I think it addresses the idea that through Peace Corps you have a sense of, you look at things in different ways. There's much more than one direction, one way to look at it. There's not only one way, there are other possibilities to doing things. And I think people are much more open to the other side, to what the other people want and what they're trying to do as well.
And you're immersed in the community too, so
Exactly.
volunteers probably, they obviously knew
You do, exactly.
They had sense what was gonna happen.
You have a much more of an understanding of the culture,
Yeah.
exactly.
And it was Kenya?
I was in Northern Thailand,
Northern Thailand, sorry.
so no, it's okay.
Okay.
And so, and a number of my experiences, not as dramatic as that, but along the same lines. Basically, we would go out and learn. I probably learned as much as I taught them in my 2 years there.
You pointed that at me more. And I, of course, was in northern Kenya, the exact intersection of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. So I was the only non-African for 200 miles in any direction.
Really? What year was that?
That was 74 through 76.
Okay.
And since returning, I'm a technical nerd. And I worked in computer science, I taught at Stanford, and most recently then at Tufts Universities, and finally doing computational genetics at MIT, which had nothing to do with anything that I did in the Peace Corps whatsoever. And yet, the Peace Corps gave me an awareness of society that I didn't have before, and a care for other human beings. And so even as my students in Kenya spent their lives basically herding camels, and they didn't have any poverty out there. You had your camels, and that's what you did. It wasn't a very rich life. It wasn't a materialistically rich life, but certainly it was a societally rich life. They had their community, and life was pretty damn good herding camels in northern Kenya in those days. Most recently, I was talking with Chuck Dambach, who was a volunteer in Eritrea, and he was one of the people who brokered the peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea. You probably don't know of the war that was going on there. I didn't. And yet about, I don't know, what did you say, approximately 1 million people died in a war about a border that nobody cared about. But once again, the president of Ethiopia and the president of Eritrea had both been taught by Peace Corps volunteers. And that's what allowed him and other volunteers who had been in that area to bring those people together. And eventually they came to a conclusion that the border really didn't matter because no one was there. So, in the last couple of years, I've been part of Occupy Boston. And all I have done is do what I can to bring awareness to inequities in our own society. And for me, the most important thing now is to build a world that's sustainable for all of our people. And of course, I don't see that happening by and large. I see the corporations dominating us to an unbelievable degree, the same reason that we're starting wars all over the place. And that's what Peace Corps brought to me, the awareness of this and the desire to build a better world where we aren't building war, we're building peace. So for Stephen Lynch, I brought a copy of the book I wrote, simply being part of Occupy Boston. And so, once again, I thank him for all of the work that he has done and supporting the Peace Corps, and indeed supporting the people of Boston and the people of the Commonwealth.
So that's you on the front cover.
Sure
It is.
is.
There you go.
The only picture I have of myself.
That's great.
And I kind of want to just, I finished my Peace Corps service in 2010, so it's
relatively
recent.
Yep.
And the modern Peace Corps today as it is, I was part of the wing when Obama first came into office, and we put in all this new funding, so it was at the $400 million. And then I started to feel that decrease toward the end of my service, and then my friends who served after me, of course, then felt it. And it definitely makes a difference. When the funding was really high, we had a lot of programs, there was a lot more support in the field, we had a lot more trainings. Something that's been an issue right now is, especially for young women, is how do we keep ourselves safe and overseas. And the training that we got in terms of security, at least in Honduras, was fantastic. But it was because we were able to have some awesome local Hondurans teach us about the culture and teach us about that, but they require pay, and the Peace Corps has to pay for those salaries. And when you cut funding, Peace Corps stops relying on those host nationals. They start relying on other Peace Corps to teach those sessions. That happens in Africa a lot, and it's not nearly as effective. And it's important if we want to continue to keep our volunteers safe and we want to continue keeping Peace Corps strong, to have that funding to be able to support our volunteers. And it's not much. As David pointed out, 25 million is not a lot, and you get so much bang for your buck. But it's something to keep in mind. And when I came back from Peace Corps, I came back here to Boston. I went to school here. I wanted to live and work here, and it was really hard to find a job. I went to BU. I was a biology undergrad. I had taught environmental science. I was in Peace Corps, did a little bit of protected areas management. And when I came back, I just didn't really have any of these hard skills that were necessary for jobs. But there was a tech company that I applied to, and using my soft skills and having Peace Corps on my resume really stood out. Because when you start to get these corporations, most people who go into corporations don't have Peace Corps on their resume. But it stood out, and to be able to tell the stories, to talk about, working in groups, trying to project manage, things like that you don't necessarily learn in college, but you definitely learn in Peace Corps and use every single day, and showing that flexibility, it got me the job. And then since then I've been able to really rise up. Now I'm a senior sales and marketing specialist. I'm quite involved in the tech community here in Boston. And a lot of that being able to adapt came from those skills I learned in Peace Corps. And that's something I don't think gets told a lot, is these skills that young adults like me are learning in Peace Corps that we're able to translate. I think, everyone kind of gets this assumption that, hey, you're going to Peace Corps, you must be some, hippie and just doing all this stuff. But you learn some really awesome business skills in Peace Corps. You learn, the project management, everything, financing, all sorts of stuff that doesn't necessarily get talked about. And it's great. And not only that, is it instills this sense of service. I think you've heard from all of us, we're volunteers at heart, and we are taking it to our local communities. Peace Corps volunteers are much more likely to be volunteering in their communities. I'm working right now with the Girl Scout troop in Via Victoria in South Boston, and before that I worked in Dorchester. And those are the skills, I'm working able to work with Latino communities because of my Spanish that I learned in Honduras. But it's important, and it's just a great, great organization. And in fact, the RPCV group here in Boston, the Boston area RPCV group, is the largest RPCV group in the entire nation.
Really?
So it's especially strong here in the Boston area because it's been so much part of our history. People are doing it, we're serving, and Boston has so many NGOs and nonprofits, and we're all involved. So it's just great, and I think hearing our stories, hopefully you can see why.
Absolutely. So our DC office handles a lot of the funding, so
That's fine.
just a couple quick questions. So right now, what is the funding for Peace Corps?
It's at $375, and
It's at
in your packet,
Yeah.
there's actually a graph for you
Oh, great.
that kind of explains it. So
Perfect.
it's this right here,
Yeah.
and on the next page I can just walk you through it. So in 2010, so at the end of my service is when we had that big influx of money.
Yep.
And before that had been rising. So that was at the highest point. The blue bar basically represents if Peace Corps funding had continued at that same level with inflation and everything, where would it be at today? So you can see it would be almost at 440. But what happened is in 2011, you can see that it got decreased to the 375.
Yeah.
And that's where it's held.
Okay.
And then with the suppression, yeah.
Yeah.
I have such a hard time saying that word. That's when you can see that it got dropped down to 355.
Okay.
And actually, I guess that's where it is right now.
Okay.
And so if nothing happens,
Yep.
if we don't get more funding, it's going to continue at this level. And you can just see that huge gap.
Oh, sure.
And that's, cutting volunteers, the number of volunteers that are serving overseas. It's cutting the number of programming and support that goes to the Peace Corps volunteers, training, that sort of thing,
Yep.
which are all extremely valuable. And so what the congressman had signed on earlier this year was a Dear Colleague letter, basically asking for support to come back up here to 385.
Okay.
So it's a little bit above to where it was,
Mhm.
but 385 is what we're asking for.
Historical factoids are important
Yep.
here. One is that Peace Corps had at one point had 15,000 in the field. We now have about 8,000.
Yeah.
About half of what we've had in the past
Okay.
in the Carter.
Okay, so 15 in Carter now
Yeah.
already. Okay.
Yeah, so think about that. Peace Corps, I mean, after you begin to think about the context I was giving you about the cost effectiveness of Peace Corps, that we would actually cut it by half in the number of volunteers. And when President Kennedy founded it, his vision was that there would be 100,000 in the field. And that group of people coming back from their service would become an enormous convoy for social change in the United States. It hasn't happened primarily because the numbers are so small. We have now 250,000 people who've served since Peace Corps was founded in the United States now, both in staff and as volunteers. About a little over 200 have been volunteers. It's a tremendous, if you begin to look at what these folks are doing in the country compared to their number, their impact is incredible. But to do this is to suggest that somehow you take out one of our best investments in security and peace and economic development. I think your point about how well they've done in the economy, what contributions they've made to the economy. They're bright people when they go in and they're better people when they come out. And that somehow this is just not logical. This isn't ideological in any sense. I mean, Republicans and Democrats, independents have served the Peace Corps. Their diversity of Peace Corps volunteers is getting incredibly good. There's just no ideological. Unfortunately, it's sort of looked at as Peace Corps being kind of a nice river thing. It's because folks don't know the numbers. They don't know the numbers. If they care about security and they care about the United States image overseas, they just need to know the numbers, and they'll know the cuts in this budget are just insane. But I don't know. One question I have for you, if I could, what happens after today? How then does the congressman sort of get this information?
Sure.
What does he
So
do with it?
I will reach out to Philip, the congressman, obviously, but Peter Gordon in our DC office handles Peace Corps issues down in the policy side. You probably have at some point. I did talk to him before this meeting actually, and the bill that you talked about, I think should be mine. I mean, I'm going to probably I'll email you with his information so that you can follow up with him about that specifically, and then I'll just give him an update on our meeting as well. But like you said, the congressman did sign on to that letter, so I think we have to see now what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
How many countries are they in now?
Currently, I think it's like 55 or something.
Okay.
I would have to double check, and I can
Yeah.
definitely.
We've
It's a general idea.
It's a total of 72.
It's not just what we do there, but these
What
stories
happens
also.
when you come back?
When we come back, I
Absolutely.
want to add a couple of stories of some of my buddies, just for
Sure.
you guys. One is a woman who, I was in an education group. One of the women came back and set up the English teaching program in the World Bank.
Wow.
So that's used by people all over the world when they come to Washington.
Yeah.
Another person, Mike Nelson, became an entomologist. He studied bugs, and he was with the World Health Organization all around the world fighting disease. So the United States gained, but much of the world gained beside him. Jim Sonday became an assistant superintendent of schools in Chicago. And Jim also, who was an American Indian, wrote the definitive text on the language of his Indian tribe, the Coldwell Indians of Washington State. So they've done things since they came back. And so they've told stories of what they did for people who were over there who've done things, but also they've done a lot of things that when they came back. And there are a lot of people who've done a lot more than I have. I know that. And those are amazing things. You're only hearing a little story, but people come back and make a difference. And they don't have to do giant things to make a difference. I think when you brought people in missing limbs in Congress, that just is giant. And you think of it as every day, but I think it brought about a very large effect, number one, and it is absolutely dramatic.
The image of Joe Mobley coming in to see these kids with their arms and legs everything. And to know that our diamond trade was contributing to that war and to the arms in that war. Joe walked in, John Kerry came over from the Senate, which never happens. You know, senators don't show up at House hearings, that doesn't happen. John showed up at the House hearing, and every one of our congressional delegation in Massachusetts responded to my request and showed up at that meeting, at that hearing, and it was unopposed. But then Joe, who was chair of our Rules Committee at the time, right, chair of Rules Committee, Joe came in, grabbed 4 of these kids like this. We're gonna get this bill out today. It was like, okay, fine. You know, you gotta go to the right place at the right time and it was dramatic.
Yeah.
But those kinds of things happen, you know, all over. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, return volunteer to a conference about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And there was 3 months ago actually, there was a volunteer who had served in Sierra Leone who has come back and gone back every single year. He was working in a village where kids had no, what? Why are we doing this? And it's because, you know, it gets lost in the shuffle, it gets lost in the budgetary vicissitudes that, you know, everybody sort of understands. But that's why we're trying to shine a light on it.
There are a lot of little things that we all do that nobody notices, but adding up, they become quite large. I don't know if I mentioned Michael Rich at the beginning. Guy from Natick, went to medical school. He was with the group Partners in Health, and he enlarged facilities in Peru. He built a huge hospital in Rwanda there. He also works in Uzbekistan when won the Nobel, his group won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he was one of the guys in the field. You know, you have to gain somewhere, some orientation to it, and some understanding. And it's not just a giant thing like he did, but it's another thing and another thing and another thing. And a lot of these things go under the radar, but we're doing a lot at low cost, very low cost. I had to pay my way to go to Nicaragua and Colombia each time, but it was worth it. Those people really needed it. And there are a lot of other things, and we just do them. They go under the radar, but they add up a huge amount. And I think to cut them out, we're cheap. We went over there cheap, you know.
Yeah, well, how does that just get, do you get, your, obviously your living situation is taken care of, do you get a stipend in addition?
You do.
But it's obviously very small, but.
So your stipend or your living condition, for me at least in Honduras, it was about $250 a month is
Okay.
what I got paid.
Okay.
And then you also accrue, like each month that you serve, a certain portion. So when I finished Peace Corps, I got a check for I think about $6,000, and that's my relocation fee, readjustment allowance.
That was
So-
not better than we did. We got at first, for where I was, we got $100 a month to live on.
Yeah.
And then because of where we were, they adjusted, we got up to $118 a month. And they put $75 a month in the bank for me. So,
And your housing's covered,
no.
No, it's also
you-
part of that living.
so you get $250,
So
and
you
you
get,
have to pay $500, and you pay rent out of that?
sort of. So it's.
We did, I don't know.
You did.
No, so it actually, so what it is you tell Peace Corps in advance what your housing is gonna be, so what your rent's gonna be.
Okay.
And so they pay you exactly that amount, and then your food, everything else, that comes out of your living allowance, which is that $250 a month.
Okay.
So if, say you, and that would include your electricity, so electricity would come out of that living allowance. They
Your
would
what?
only- Your living allowance?
What did you call that?
Electricity.
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 Oh, I've heard it. You guys had electricity.
If you have it.
Yeah. Yeah,
We didn't have electricity.
No,
So we didn't have a bill, we didn't have to pay the bill.
but so no one had electricity?
I did. I lived in the city. So
Okay.
we got, so when they raised us the second year, it was $118 a month to pay for everything. Room, board, and living expenses.
That's our electricity.
Yeah,
That's
so
our
we're-
rate lamps.
We're getting
That's
up
right, we
to
use those.
But you know,
Electricity was irregular.
to tell you a quick story about that, I was finishing as an engineer, as a mechanical engineer at Northeastern, and at the time, engineers were in demand, and I was a thermodynamics major, and I got a job up from a power company. And they recruited me, and I walked in, and I said, no, I said, I don't think I can take the job. And they said, why? Is, you know, Power Tech competing with us or somebody, you know? I said, no, I've got a better offer. I said, yeah, $88 a month, all the rice I can eat, and outdoor plumbing. He said, why would anybody turn down this? He said, you get a free master's degree if you take this job. But I mean, those are the kinds, and of course, it was the best decision I ever made in my life. But that's the kind of thing that's happening. Those are stories that if people sort of knew those kinds of things and say, why wouldn't we be making this the centerpiece of our foreign policy rather than an also ran kind of marginal aspect of our relationship to the world? I mean, you look at the Mideast right now, the kind of things that Peace Corps volunteers know, the kind of work that they do on the ground, the kind of relationships that they build on the ground, are the kinds of things that ultimately would make us much more powerful as a nation from a security standpoint, because people care about volunteers. Volunteers care about people. They come in contact with an American, not with a gun, not with boots on the ground, not with rifles, but with seed for corn. And it's like, oh, that's what America represents. It's a very different profile.
It's a non-power. It's a people, not power.
And you also build up relationships, not necessarily with just host country nationals, but in Thailand, you had the Canadians, the Germans, the Japanese, the Israelis, the Australians, the New Zealanders. All these people had the equivalent of Peace Corps over there as well. And so you're meeting these people, you're talking with them, you're learning from them, you're teaching them. It's just kind of this giant pot, I guess, that everyone just kind of hops in and become for the stew.
And two, as more women and minorities are starting to serve in countries, and I've looked it up, it's 76 countries. Yeah. You also kind of promote a profile of change as well. So I lived in a very rural community. It was very male dominated. And to be able to be a strong woman, come in, go work in the fields, show them, hey, women can be farmers too. I did a little girls empowerment group and taught them science and things like that, and brought the girls up. It just was a soft way of saying, hey, there's other ways to look at people, there's other ways to treat people, and especially as more minorities are also serving too, it's a great way just to show, look, this is who America is, this is how we value people, and here's how you can value these people too.
A lot of Thais didn't really like American because I didn't have blue eyes, blonde hair, and I couldn't play a guitar.
They had a different name for us, by the way. There was Americans, and then there were Peace Corps. And they didn't call us Americans. Americans were AID workers. They called us Peace Cops, CORPS, but they didn't mean cops, they meant Peace Corps. So they would say to us, and we would have, if we had sneakers on, they would call them Peace Corps. You're wearing your Peace Corps today. So the kids in the neighborhood, if they had them, usually they were sandals or no shoes, but when they had them, we would call them Peace Corps. So we had an identity that was unique, that was sort of like, these are not the typical Americans that we see here. Well, these are Peace Corps volunteers, and we don't even identify them. We ride in the back of trucks and learn language and carry babies, and they just don't see that stuff. It's not who we are. So it's a very powerful idea, and it's just not been well recognized. By the way, one of our own folks is now Peace Corps director. She worked here with my wife at World Education. Her name is Carrie Hessler-Radlett. And she's now acting Peace Corps. She was deputy, she's now acting, and she's waiting for confirmation. So the hearings are coming up soon. So that's her.
Okay, great, yeah.
That's her name, Carrie Hessler-Radlett.
Okay.
And she's the current, and we just would like to get her confirmed if at all possible.
Okay, well, the senators have to.
Well, I know that. Oh, I know. And Marky's the chair of the Peace Corps committee in the
is
House.
he?
Isn't he?
Yeah, so I know. He and the congressman have made up since the campaign, hopefully.
He's in the Senate?
No, is he in the Senate on the House side? He was in. Marky was on the House side, or is he there on the Senate side?
Marky is now chairing in the Senate, chairing the subcommittee. He's on the Foreign Relations Committee. He chairs the subcommittee on Peace Corps.
Oh, wow.
So he'll be responsible for her confirmation.
Great.
But if the congressman can mention something, that would be great. She's really, really good. She's done a phenomenal job in a very difficult situation, given the security issues that she's had to deal with. I called her the other day. She called me back from Ethiopia. She said, she said, I only have 4 minutes. She said, my phone here has minutes.
Yeah.
And so she quickly
Even
told
she
me.
does it, it's not really fun.
Yeah,
She has minutes.
yeah, she has minutes, so she quickly told me what her qualifications were if I got a chance to talk to Marky about it. And I thought to myself, boy, Carrie, you're still a Peace Corps volunteer.
I know, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, she's a director.
Yeah, and she's got minutes on her cell phone.
Yeah. So you want to talk about budget issues?
Wow.
And more than anything else, what we have been saying, and those examples of USAID, et cetera, is no, we are the best representatives of America. We are the common Americans. It's the people in USAID who really are not typical Americans. So they get to see regular Americans and say, hey, they're people just like us.
They're great technicians, but most of them go there with technical skills
Yeah.
and not as much cultural skills.
Well,
And then we've all made cultural mistakes there, but we mixed with the people. We didn't have a big project of an organization like the AD to do. We were in there in the trenches, to so to say. We all got the disease. I'll bet that you all got the same disease as I got along the way.
Three times I had malaria.
Oh, God,
I mean,
and,
dysentery.
Wasn't
no
doctors.
Spotlight.
They had a strike at the university I was teaching at for a while, and we were walking out there, and about a quarter mile before we were supposed to meet students, they stopped and started handing out rubber hoses about this big, and guys are pulling chains out of their pockets. And I said, man, I'm in the wrong place. And I see guys get hit with rocks, I see Molotov cocktails go in the air, and I said, that's one of the few times in my life I've worried about my life. And I said, I was lucky, I didn't have problems, I stayed away, I didn't want to be in that whole thing. But I sure learned a lot what it was like when after that we saw a lot of student rebellion in this country. And they knew, they went at it big time. And you get to understand a lot more of the news and act accordingly.
Yeah.
Because
It's interesting, one of the biggest countries, by the way, in terms of the AID folks, a lot of the AID folks are culturally sensitive, but a lot of them have served in this, a lot of them served overseas before they go to AID. My biggest contribution to Peace Corps was my hair, because the malaria pills started my baldness. I was 24 years old.
Really?
Yeah, I started falling out. None of my family is bald. None of my family has lost their hair. So my biggest contribution to Peace Corps was my hair. Because the drugs were so strong.
They're different now?
They're better.
Yes.
They're better.
They're better,
Yeah. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
we took them when I left the country because of me with dysentery.
It's still required after you leave the country to take malaria pills.
Yeah.
After this, when you leave here, no matter where you go.
No matter where you go,
Yeah.
Peace Corps, yeah.
They're not as toxic as they used to be.
The thing that I recall more than I think anything else is Peace Corps volunteers, people I work with tended to talk with the people as opposed to talking to them. And I think that, at least for me, that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
I played basketball in the league, which was not so easy at 12,650 feet above sea level. I danced in a folk festival, one of the largest folk festivals in the country, and got a lot of funny comments about it with the costumes, and I should have brought a picture. And I did those things, and that you mixed whatever it was. You did because we thought of ourselves more as part of their country than ours.
Well, you triggered something. The relationship with the country you serve in is very special. And so Peace Corps has like an alumni organization called the National Peace Corps Association, which is there to advocate for Peace Corps. And we have 142 groups of either geographical or country-based, meaning like Northeast or United States, or country of service groups like Friends of Sierra Leone, where I am. And they've stayed in touch for 50 years now. They've stayed in touch. They have their annual meetings. They stay in touch with issues that are going on in Sierra Leone. They constantly send clothes. They constantly send equipment. They go back and forth. We had our 50th reunion in Freetown. Our group brought people over and met with the president. Everybody, people went back to the villages. So that relationship, it's a transformative relationship, and it lasts a lifetime. And that engagement affects the things that you do every day and the way you do your job. There's just such a tremendous impact for folks who, I mean, it's a tremendous privilege to be accepted in Peace Corps and to serve. But my only hope is that when you get a chance to talk with Steve about this, just sort of mention that I was here.
Sure.
And mention the sort of passion
Absolutely, yeah.
that you've seen here
Yeah,
today.
definitely.
There's one thing that hasn't been discussed, but I just remembered, I knew a woman who was a really good candidate for Peace Corps. And because she basically had gone through the process, but I guess that there was a hold, I assume because of the economic situation, she finally dropped out of the running and took a job somewhere else because she just couldn't wait to be brought in. And so I think you run the risk of losing a lot of good people that would otherwise be serving Peace Corps because of that.
This is the best thing I ever did for myself, to go there for 2 years, because even though I work in an economic situation for profit, it's the best thing I did for myself. It changed my whole point of view on everything in the world. Everything I was, even more naive then than I am now. When I was 27 years old when I joined the Peace Corps, and I couldn't believe when I first left this country. It was my first time leaving the country. I would say the people today are better trained than I am. The country's better, more aware than I was at that time. But it changed my life, and some of the things I've done, I never would have done. And my vision on a lot of things in the world and how I react to them is also very, very different. And even with my family, who most of them would never do that, but they see, even my kids and my nephews and nieces, see that my views on these things are very different, and there are things to do other than go get a job. You can do things, and it may be better for you also.
Absolutely, this is great. Thank you very much. I
You
enjoyed
didn't
it.
have so much time.
No, absolutely. No, I enjoyed it very, very much.
You're great.
So, yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.